Hello, thank you for joining me on day 4 of A Year with Aquinas, where we are going through his Summa Theologica. We are in the first part, question 5, on goodness in general. You can follow along with me on newadvent.org/summa. We are continuing on Article 3, whether every being is good. Objection 1. It seems that not every being is good, for goodness is something superadded to being, as is clear from 1. But whatever is added to being limits it, as substance, quantity, etc. Therefore, goodness limits being. Therefore, not every being is good. Reply to objection 1. Substance, quantity, quality, and everything included in them limit being by applying it to some essence or nature. Now, in this sense, goodness does not add anything to being beyond the aspect of desirability and perfection, which is also proper to being, whatever kind of nature it may be. Hence, goodness does not limit being. Objection 2. Further, no evil is good. Quote, "Woe to you that call evil good and good evil," end quote, Isaiah 5:20. But some things are called evil. Therefore, not every being is good. Reply to objection 2. No being can be spoken of as evil, formally as being, but only so far as it lacks being. Thus, a man is said to be evil because he lacks some virtue, and an eye is said to be evil because it lacks the power to see well. Objection 3. Further, goodness implies desirability. Now, primary matter does not imply desirability, but rather that which desires. Therefore, primary matter does not contain the formality of goodness. Therefore, not every being is good. Reply to objection 3. As primary matter has only potential being, so it is only potentially good. Although, according to the Platonists, primary matter may be said to be a non-being on account of the privation attaching to it. Nevertheless, it does participate to a certain extent in goodness, i.e., by its relation to it, or aptitude for goodness. Consequently, to be desirable is not its property, but to desire. Objection 4. The philosopher notes that, quote, "In mathematics, goodness does not exist," end quote, but mathematics are entities. Otherwise, there would be no science of mathematics. Therefore, not every being is good. Reply to objection 4. Mathematical entities do not subsist as realities, because they would be in some sort of good if they subsisted, but they only have logical existence inasmuch as they are abstracted from motion and matter. Thus, they cannot have the aspect of an end, which itself has the aspect of moving another. Nor is it repugnant that there should be in some logical entity neither goodness nor form of goodness, since the idea of being is prior to the idea of goodness, as was said in the preceding article. On the contrary, every being that is not God is God's creature. Now every creature of God is good. 1 Timothy 4:4. And God is the greatest good. Therefore every being is good. I answer that every being, as being, is good. For all beings, as beings, have actuality and in some way perfect, since every act implies some perfection. And perfection implies desirability and goodness, as is clear from 1. Hence, it follows that every being, as such, is good. Article 4. Whether goodness has the aspect of final cause. Objection 1. It seems that goodness has not the aspect of a final cause, but rather of other causes. For as Dionysius says, quote, "Goodness is praised as beauty," end quote. But beauty has the aspect of a formal cause. Therefore, goodness has the aspect of a formal cause. Reply to objection 1. Beauty and goodness and a thing are identically fundamental, for they are based upon the same thing, namely the form, and consequently goodness is praised as beauty, but they differ logically, for goodness properly relates to the appetite, goodness being what all things desire, and therefore it has the aspect of an end, the appetite being a kind of movement towards a thing. On the other hand, beauty relates to the cognitive faculty, for beautiful things are those which pleased when seen. Hence, beauty consists in due proportion, for the senses delight in things duly proportioned, as in what is after their own kind, because even sense is some sort of reason, just as every cognitive faculty. Now, since knowledge is by assimilation, and similarly relates to form, beauty properly belongs to nature of a formal cause. Objection 2. Further, goodness is self-diffusive, for Dionysius says that goodness is that where all things subsist and are. But to be self-giving implies the aspect of efficient cause. Therefore, goodness has the aspect of an efficient cause. Reply to objection 2. Goodness is described as self-diffusing in the sense that it is an end in the sense that an end is said to move. Objection 3. Further, Augustine says that, quote, we exist because God is good, end quote, but we owe our existence to God as the efficient cause. Therefore, goodness implies the aspect of an efficient cause. Reply to objection 3. He who has a will is said to be good, for so far as he has a good will, because it is by our will that we employ whatever powers we may have. Hence, a man is said to be good, not by his good understanding, but by his good will. Now, the will relates to the end as to its proper object. Thus, the saying, quote, we exist because God is good, end quote, has reference to the final cause. On the contrary, the philosopher says that, quote, that is to be considered as the end and good of other things, for the sake of which something is, end quote. Therefore, goodness has the aspect of a final cause. I answer that, since goodness is that which all things desire, and since it has the aspect of an end, it is clear that goodness implies the aspect of an end. Nevertheless, the idea of goodness presupposes the idea of an efficient cause, and also of a formal cause. For we see what first is in causing, is last in the thing caused. Fire, e.g., heats first of all before it reproduces the form of fire, though the heat in the fire flows from it substantial form. Now, in causing goodness and the end to come first, both of which move the agent to act. Secondly, the action of the agent moving to the form. Thirdly, comes the form. Hence, in that which is caused, the converse ought to take place, so that there should be first the form whereby it is a being. Second, we consider in its effective power, whereby it is perfect in being, for a thing is perfect when it can reproduce its like, as the philosopher says. Thirdly, there follows the formality of goodness, which is the basic principle of perfection. Article 5. Whether the essence of goodness consists in mode, species, and order. Objection 1. It seems that the essence of goodness does not consist in mode, species, and order, for goodness and being differ logically. But mode, species, and order seem to belong to the nature of being, for it is written, quote, thou hast ordered all things in measure and number and weight, end quote, Wisdom 11:21. And to these three can be reduced species, mode, and order, as Augustine says, quote, measure fixes the mode of everything, number gives it species, and weight gives it rest and stability, end quote. Therefore, the essence of good does not consist in mode, species, and order. Reply to objection 1. These three only follow upon being, so far as it is perfect, and according to this perfection it is good. Objection 2. Further, mode, species, and order are themselves good. Therefore, if the essence of goodness consists in mode, species, and order, then every mode must have its own mode, species, and order. The same would be the case with species and order in endless succession. Reply to objection 2. Mode, species, and order are said to be good, and to be beings, not as though they themselves were substances, but because it is through them that other things are both beings and good. Hence they have no need of other things whereby they are good, for they are spoken of as good, not as though formerly constituted by something else, but formerly constituting other goods. Thus whiteness is not said to be a being as though it were by anything else, but because by it something has accidental being, and an object that is white. As an object that is white. Objection 3. Further, evil is privation of mode, species, and order, but evil is not the total absence of goodness. Therefore, the essence of goodness does not consist in mode, species, and order. Reply to objection 3. Every being is due to some form. Hence, according to every being of a thing is its mode, species, and order. Thus, a man has a mode, species, and an order, as he is white, virtuous, learned, and so on, according to everything predicated of him. But evil deprives a thing of some sort of being, as blindness deprives us of that being which is sight. Yet it does not destroy every mode, species, and order, but only such as follow upon the being of sight. Objection 4. Further, that wherein consists of the essence of goodness cannot be spoken as of evil. Yet we can speak of an evil mode, species, and order. Therefore, the essence of goodness does not consist in mode, species, and order. Reply to objection 4. Augustine says, quote, that every mode as a mode is good, end quote, and the same can be said of species and order. But an evil mode, species, and order are so called as being less than they ought to be, or as not belonging to that which they ought to belong. Therefore, they are called evil because they are out of place and incongruous. End of quote. Objection 5. Further, mode, species, and order are caused by weight, number, and measure, as appears from the quotation from Augustine, but not every good thing has not every good thing has weight, number, and measure. For Ambrose says, quote, it is the nature of light not to have been created in number, weight, and measure, end quote. Therefore, the essence of goodness does not consist in mode, species, and order. Reply to objection 5. It is the nature of light. The nature of light is spoken of as a being without number, weight, and measure. Not absolutely, but a comparison with corporeal things, because the power of light extends to all corporeal things, inasmuch as it is an active quality of the first body that causes change, i.e., the heavens. On the contrary, Augustine says, quote, these three, mode, species, and order, as common good things, are in everything God has made. Thus, where these three abound in where these three things abound, the very things are very good. Where they are less, things are less good. Where they do not exist at all, there can be nothing good. End quote. But this would not be unless the essence of goodness consisted in them. Therefore, the essence of goodness consists in mode, species, and order. I answer that everything is said to be good so far as it is perfect, for in that way only it is desirable, as shown above. Now, a thing is said to be perfect if it lacks nothing according to the mode of its perfection. But since everything is what it is by its form, and since the form presupposes certain things, and and from the form, certain things necessarily flow. In order for a thing to be perfect and good, it must have a form, together with all that precedes and follows upon that form. Now, the form presupposes determination or commemoration, no, commensuration of its principles, whether material or efficient, and this is signified by the mode. Hence, it is said that the measure marks the mode, but the form itself is signified by the species, for everything is placed in its species by its form. Hence the number is said to give the species, for definitions signifying species are like numbers, according to the philosopher. For as a unit added to or taken from a number changes its species, so a difference added to or taken from a definition changes its species. Further, upon the form flows an inclination to the end, or to an action, or something of the sort. For everything, insofar as it is an act, acts and tends towards that which is in accordance with its form, and this belongs to weight and order. Hence the essence of goodness, so far as it consists in perfection, consists also in mode, species, and order. Article 6. Whether goodness is rightly divided into the virtuous, the useful, and the pleasant. Objection 1. It seems that goodness is not rightly divided into the virtuous, the useful, and the pleasant. For goodness is divided by the 10 predicaments, as the philosopher says. But the virtuous, the useful, and the pleasant can be found under one predicament. Therefore, goodness is not rightly divided by them. Reply to objection 1. Goodness, so far as is identical with being, is divided by the 10 predicaments, but this division belongs to it according to its proper formality. Objection 2. Further, every division is made by opposites, but these three do not seem to be opposites, for the virtuous is pleasing, and no wickedness is useful, whereas this ought to be the case if the division were made by opposites, for then the virtuous and the useful would be opposed, and Tooley speaks of this. Therefore, this division is incorrect. Reply to objection 2. This division is not by opposite things, but by opposite aspects. Now those things are called pleasing, which have no other formality under which they are desirable, except the pleasant, being sometimes hurtful and contrary to virtue, whereas the useful applies to such as have nothing desirable in themselves, but are desired as only helpful to something further, as the taking of a bitter medicine, while the virtuous is predicated of such as are desirable in themselves. Objection 3. Further, where one thing is on account of another, there is only one thing. But the useful is not goodness, except insofar as it is pleasing and virtuous. Therefore, the useful ought not be divided against the pleasant and the virtuous. Reply to objection 3. Goodness is not divided into these three as something unequivocal to be predicated equally of all of them, but as something analogical to be predicated of them according to the priority and the posterity. Hence, it is predicated chiefly of the other virtues. Hence, it is predicated chiefly of the virtuous, then the pleasant, and lastly the useful. On the contrary, Ambrose makes of this division of goodness. I'll say that again. On the contrary, Ambrose makes use of this division of goodness. I answer that. This division properly concerns human goodness, but if we consider the nature of goodness from a higher and more universal point of view, we shall find that this division properly concerns goodness as such. For everything is good so far as it is desirable, and this is the term of the movement of the appetite. The term of those movements can be seen from a consideration of the movement of a natural body. Now, the movement of a natural body is terminated by the end absolutely, and relatively by the means through which it comes to the end, where the movement ceases. So a thing is called a term of movement so far as it terminates any part of that movement. Now, the ultimate term of movement can be taken in two ways, either as the thing itself towards which it tends, e.g., a place or form, or a state of rest in that thing. Thus, in the movement of the appetite, the thing which is desired that terminates the movement of that appetite relatively, as by means which something tends toward another, is called the useful. But that sought after as the last thing absolutely, terminating the movement of the appetite, as a thing towards which for its own sake the appetite tends, is called the virtuous. For the virtuous is that which is desired for its own sake, but that which terminates the movement of the appetite in the form of the rest in the desired thing is called the pleasant. Question 6. The goodness of God. Article 1. Whether God is good. Objection 1. It seems that to be good does not belong to God, for goodness consists in mode, species, and order. But these do not seem to belong to God, since God is immense and is not ordered to do anything else. I'll say that again. Since God is immense and is not ordered to do anything else. Therefore, to be good does not belong to God. Reply to objection 1. To have mode, species, and order belongs to the essence of the caused good, but good is in God as it is in it as in its cause. Hence it belongs to him to impose mode, species, and order on others. Wherefore these three things are in God as in their cause. Objection 2. Further, the good is that which all things desire, but all things do not desire God, because all things do not know him, and nothing is desired unless it is known. Therefore, to be good does not belong to God. Reply to objection 2. All things, by desiring their own perfection, desire God himself, inasmuch as the perfections of all things are so many similitudes of the divine being, as appears from what is said above. And so, of those things which desire God, some know him as he is himself, and this is proper to the rational creature. Others know some participation of his goodness, and this belongs also to the sensible knowledge. Others have a natural desire without knowledge, as beings directed to their ends by a higher intelligence. On the contrary, it is written, Lamentations 3:25, quote, "The Lord is good to them that hope in him, to the soul that seeketh him." End quote. I answer that to be good belongs preeminently to God, for a thing is good according to its desirableness. Now everything seeks after its own perfection, and the perfection and form and effect constitute a certain likeness to the agent, since every agent makes its like, and hence the agent itself is desirable and has the nature of good. For the very thing which is desirable in it is the participation of its likeness. Therefore, since God is the first efficient cause of all things, it is manifest that the aspects of good and desirableness belong to him, and hence Dionysius attributes good to God as the first efficient cause, saying that God is called good, quote, as by whom all things subsist, end quote. Article 2. Whether God is the supreme good. Objection 1. It seems that God is not the supreme good, for the supreme good adds something to good. Otherwise, it would belong to every good. But everything which is an addition to anything else is let me repeat that. Everything which is an addition to anything else is a compound thing. Therefore, the supreme good is a compound. But God is supremely simple, as was shown above. Therefore, God is not the supreme good. Reply to objection 1. The supreme good does not add good and does not the supreme good does not add to good any absolute thing, but only a relation. Now, a relation of God to creatures is not a reality in God, but in the creatures. For it is in God and our idea alone only. What is knowable is so called with relation to knowledge, not that it depends on knowledge, because knowledge depends on it. Thus, it is not necessary that there should be composition in the supreme good, but only that other things are deficient in comparison with it. Objection 2. Further, quote, good is what all desire, end quote, as the philosopher says. Now, what all desire is nothing but God, who is the end of all things. Therefore, there is no other good but God. This also appears from what is said Luke 18:19, quote, "None is good but God alone," end quote. But we use this word supreme in comparison with others, as e.g. supreme heat is used in comparison with all other heat. Therefore, God cannot be called the supreme good. Reply to objection 2. When we say that good is what all desire, this is not to be understood that every kind of good thing is desired by all, but that whatever is desired has the nature of good. And when it is said that, quote, "none is good but God alone," end quote, this is to be understood of essential goodness, as will be explained in the next article. Objection 3. Further, supreme implies comparison, but things not in the same genus are not comparable, as sweetness is not properly greater or less than a line. Therefore, since God is not in the same genus as other good things, as appears above, it seems that God cannot be called the supreme good in relation to others. Reply to objection 3. Things not in the same genus are in no way comparable to each other, if indeed they are in a different genre. Now we say that God is not in the same genus with other good things, not that he is in any other genus, but that he is outside of genus. And this is the principle of every genus. And thus he is compared to others by excess. And it is in this kind of comparison the supreme good implies. On the contrary, Augustine says that the Trinity of the divine persons is, quote, "the supreme good discerned by purified minds," end quote. I answer that God is the supreme good. God is the supreme good simply, and not only as existing in any genus or order of things, for good is attributed to God, as was said in the preceding article, inasmuch as all desired perfections flow from him as their first cause. They do not, however, flow from him as from an univocal agent, as shown above, but as from an agent which does not agree with its effects either in species or genus. Now the likeness of an effect in the univocal cause is found uniformly, but in the evocal cause it is found more excellently, as heat is in the sun more excellently than it is in fire. Therefore, as good is in God as in the first, but not the univocal cause of all things, it must be in him in the most excellent way, and therefore he is called the supreme good. Article 3. Whether to be essentially good belongs to God alone. Objection 1. It seems that to be essentially good does not belong to God alone, for as one is convertible with being, so is good, as we have said above. But every being is essentially one, as appears from the philosopher. Therefore, every being is good essentially. Reply to objection 1. One does not include the idea of perfection, but only of indivision, which belongs to everything according to its own essence. Now, the essence of simple things are undivided both actually and potentially, but the essences of the compounds are undivided only actually. And therefore, everything must be one essentially, but not good essentially, as was shown above. Objection 2. Further, if good is what all things desire, since being itself is desired by all, then the being of each thing is good. Let me say that again. Objection 2. Further, if good is what all things desire, since being itself is desired by all, then the being of each thing is its good. But everything is a being essentially. Therefore, every being is essentially good. Reply to objection 2. Although everything is good in that it has being, yet the essence of a creature is not very being, and therefore it does not follow that a creature is good essentially. Objection 3. Further, everything is good by its own goodness. Therefore, if anything which is not essentially good, it is necessary to say that its goodness is not its own essence. Therefore, its goodness, since it is a being, must be good, and if it is good by some other goodness, the same question applies to that goodness also. Therefore, we must either proceed to infinity or come to some goodness which is not good by any other goodness. Therefore, the first supposition holds good. Therefore, everything is good essentially. Reply to objection 3. The goodness of a creature is not its very essence, but something superadded. It is either its essence or some added perfection, or the order to its end. Still, goodness itself thus added its good. Still, the goodness itself thus added is good, just as it is a being. But for this reason, it is called being because by it something has being, not because it itself has through something else, not because it itself has being through something else. Hence, for this reason, it is called good because by something it is by something. Hence, for this reason, it is called good because by it something is good, and not because it itself has some other goodness whereby it is good. On the contrary, Boethius says that, quote, all things but God are good by participation, end quote. Therefore, they are not good essentially. I answer that God alone is good essentially, for everything is called good according to its perfection. Now, perfection of a thing is threefold. First, according to the constitution of its own being. Secondly, in any respect of accidents being added as necessary for its perfect operation. Thirdly, perfection consists in attaining to something else as the end. Thus, for instance, the first perfection of fire consists in its essence, which it has through its own substantial form. Its second perfection consists in heat, lightness, and dryness, and the like. Its third perfection is to rest in its own place. This triple perfection belongs to no creature by its own essence. It only belongs to God, in whom alone essence is existence, in whom there are no accidents, since whatever belongs to others accidentally belongs to him essentially. As to be powerful, wise, and the like, as appears from what is stated above, and he is not directed to anything else as unto an end, but is himself the last end of all things. Hence it is manifest that God alone has every kind of perfection by his own essence. Therefore, he alone is good essentially. Article 4. Whether all things are good by the divine goodness. Objection 1. It seems that all things are good by the divine goodness. For Augustine says, quote, this and that are good. Take away this and that, and see good itself, if thou canst. And so thou shalt see God good, not by any other good, but good for every good. End quote. But everything is good by its own good. Therefore, everything is good by that very good which is God. I don't know if I said the article. So we're on Article 4, whether all things are good by the divine goodness. What we just heard was Objection 1. The answer that is sufficient to reply to all the objections. Objection 2. Further, as Boethius says, all things are called good accordingly as they are directed to God, and this is by reason of the divine goodness. Therefore, all things are good by the divine goodness. On the contrary, all things are good inasmuch as they have being, but they are not called beings through divine being, but through their own being. Therefore, all things are not good by the divine goodness, but by their own goodness. I answer that. As regards relative things, we must admit extrinsic denomination, as a thing is denominated place from place and measure from measure. But as regards absolute things, opinions differ. Plato held the existence of separate ideas of all things, and that individuals were denominated by them as participating in separate ideas. For instance, that Socrates is called a man according to the separate idea of a man. Now, just as he laid down separate ideas of man and horse, which are called absolute man and absolute horse, and so likewise he laid down separate ideas of being and of one, and these he called absolute being and absolute oneness. And by participation of these, everything was called being or one, and what was thus absolute being and absolute one, he said was the supreme good. And because good is convertible with being, as one also is, he called God the absolute good, from whom all things are good by way of participation. Although this opinion appears to be unreasonable in affirming separate ideas of natural things as subsisting of themselves, as Aristotle argues in many ways, still it is absolutely true that if there is first something which is essential, which is essentially being, and essentially good, which we call God, as appears from what is shown above, and Aristotle agrees with this. Hence, from the first being, essentially such and good, everything can be called good as a being, inasmuch as it participates in by way of a certain assimilation, which it is far removed from defective, which is far removed and defective, as appears above. Everything is therefore called good from the divine goodness, as from the first exemplary, effective, and final principles of goodness. Nevertheless, everything is called good by reason of its similitude of the divine goodness to it belonging to it, which is formally its own goodness, whereby it's denominated good. And so of all things there is one goodness, and yet many goodnesses. Question 7. The infinity of God. Article 1. Whether God is infinite. Objection 1. It seems that God is not infinite, for everything infinite is imperfect, as the philosopher says, because it has parts and matter, as it is said in physics. I don't know that book. But God is most perfect, therefore he is not infinite. The answer that appears from this reply to the first objection. The answer that contains the reply to the first objection. Objection 2. Further, according to the philosopher, finite and infinite belong to quantity, but there is no quantity in God, for he is not a body, as was shown above. Therefore, it does not belong to him to be infinite. Reply to objection 2. Quantity is determined by its form, which can be seen in the fact that a figure which consists of quantity is terminated. It is a quantitative. Is it a kind? It is no, is a kind of quantitative form. Hence, the infinite of quantity is the infinite of matter. Such a kind of infinite cannot be attributed to God, as was said in the above article. Objection 3. Further, what is here in such a way as not to be elsewhere is finite according to place. Therefore, that which is a thing in such a way as not to be attributed to another thing is finite according to substance. But God is this and not another. For he is not a stone or wood. Therefore, God is not infinite in substance. Reply to objection 3. The fact that the being of God is self-subsisting, not received in any other, is thus called infinite, shows him to be distinguished from all other beings, and all other things apart from him, and all other things to be apart from him. Even so, were there such things as self-subsisting whiteness, the very fact that it did not exist in anything else will make it distinct from every other whiteness existing in a subject. On the contrary, Damascene says that, quote, God is infinite and eternal and boundless, end quote. I answer that all the ancient philosophers attributed infinitude to the first principle, as is said in physics, and with reason, for they considered that things flow forth infinitely from the first principle. And because some erred concerned with the nature of the first principle, and in consequence they erred also concerning its infinity, for so much as they asserted that matter was the first principle. Consequently, they attributed to the first principle a material infinity, to the effect that some infinite body was the first principle of things. We must consider, therefore, that a thing is called infinite because it is not finite. Now, matter is in a way made finite by form, and the form by matter. Matter, indeed, is made finite by form, inasmuch as matter, before it receives its form, is in potentiality to many forms. But on receiving a form, it is terminated by that one. Again, form is made finite by matter, inasmuch as form consists in itself, considered in itself, is common to many. But when received in matter, the form is terminated in this one particular thing. Now, matter is perfected by the form by which it is made finite. Therefore, infinite as attributed to matter, has the nature of something imperfect. For it is as it were formless matter. On the other hand, form is not made perfect by matter, but rather is contracted by matter, and hence the infinite. Regarded on the one part of the form is not determined by matter, has the nature of something perfect. Now, being is the most formal of all things, and as appears from what is shown above. Since therefore the divine being is not a being received in anything, but he is his own subsistent being, as was shown above, it is clear that God himself is infinite and perfect. Thank you for joining me on this day 4, and I hope that you found it useful, and if you did, I'd be very grateful if you shared it with a friend. And we will come back here tomorrow with day 5 on Article 2, whether anything about God can be essentially infinite. God bless you and have a great day.